I have some different types of experiences, all of it kind of revolving around art. I think there's that part, you know, as we can probably all relate to. Growing up, you want to be an artist, and you're always thinking, I don't know if I can make this a career, or I don't know, so you end up circling it, and then eventually coming back to it at some point, right? We circle it. I was a teacher, history and art, and then went back for another master's in mental health counseling with art therapy, and then now I'm finally back to community arts and art and education again, which I love. The art therapy piece is interesting because I think inherently as artists, we all know it is therapeutic. It just automatically happens, whether it's calming, whether it's part of your mindfulness practice, whether it's part of your creativity, and the continual stimulation that we all need as we continue on. But tonight I'm going to talk about gouache, one particular type of paint. And I'm selling it as kind of the best of all worlds. It's kind of enjoyed a bit of a renaissance, I'd say, in the last 15 to 20 years. If you've ever, first let me ask you a few questions. Can people give me a show of hands how many watercolor artists I have here? Okay. How about oil? Okay. And then acrylic? Oh, okay. And has anybody used gouache? Okay, okay. So, gouache usually falls under the family of watercolor. People automatically assume it's part of that group. And I would argue it kind of has the best of all worlds. A little bit, I was just speaking right before this. It really has these great characteristics that are reminiscent of oil painting, acrylic, and watercolor. And we'll talk a little bit about why. But I think it's enjoying a bit of a renaissance because it's really moved. It used to be in the world of the, it was, you know, first created for designers, you know, back in the 30s and 40s and 50s, you know, as a matte paint that would reproduce well. And it wasn't created to paint a painting that was going to hang in a gallery or in a museum. It was really for the practical aspects of reproduction. So the paint could be difficult to work with. And even though it was flat, they were often fugitive pigments, so it didn't last. It could be difficult to work with, a bit chunky. But now we've really moved into what they call artist gouache, and it's jam-packed with pigment, and that's the beauty of it. The designer's gouache, or the old gouache, often had a chalk, calcium carbonate mixed in with the pigment to give it some body and to tint it up, whereas now the artist gouache has really hit a high quality of intense pigment load, and usually the higher quality paints, you know, just have the pigment and the gum arabic as a binder, and very little, if any, chalk at all. That said, you know, you can kind of have, I brought a ton of different types of gouache paint tonight. I think it's all fine. It's much better than it used to be, right? I mean, when I was in art school a couple of decades ago, I hated gouache. We had to do it. And I remember struggling against it so much. It was really hard. I didn't enjoy it, and I never went back to it until I got into plein air painting about 10 years ago. And as Diane said, I run the Central Mass plein air painting group. And we just started that. This will be our 5th season coming up. So we're kind of around the 495 build, and then kind of heading a little bit west. And you're welcome. We're going to talk about that at the end too, or a little bit later. But you're welcome to join us. Anyways, gouache is a great medium for painting outdoors. Water-based, plays well with other water-based medium. Really does well with watercolor. So it's a great mixed media piece of paint as well. And it's clean up, so if you're outdoors, it's quick, it's easy. A lot of plein air painters will use gouache to create studies that they sell, or they'll bring into their studio and work indoors with oil to create larger paintings later. So I'm going to show you an example of a couple of those artists here. So anyways, that's that's what I would say to start off with gouache. It just has a lot of wonderful qualities. Okay. So again, I think when I look at the properties and what makes it unique, it's really the pigment load. It's this flat matte. It dries flat and matte. And I did bring a bunch. You can try it out later if you wish. But it's just this intensity of pigment. So if I were to ask you tonight, if you could identify yourself, are you if you've been painting for a while, do you identify more as a colorist or maybe more as a tonalist? Does anybody identify one way or the other? Do you know what a tonalist is? Okay. All right. Colorists are painters like Matisse, Cézanne. Impressionists are definitely colorists, right? It's in the name, they love color, love vibrancy. Gouache is great for you. If you're a tonalist, tonalists are more like the somber hues, much more compressed palette, those earthy tones and the creams and the grays. Gouache is still definitely usable, but the pigment load might actually work against you if you are a tonalist, that type of a painter, if that makes sense. Does that make sense? Okay. So, as I said, pigment load is like the first thing I would say or identify as what property makes it super unique. It has a great consistency as well. It's not as thick as acrylic. It doesn't have as much body as acrylic, so it's a little softer, but it is definitely not watercolor either. It has this kind of creamy, somewhere between custard and toothpaste, I'd say, somewhere in between there. And just like watercolor out of the tube, a little bit goes a long way. It's very intense. Now the beauty of it is, if we think about comparing it to watercolor, a little bit goes a long way, much like the tinting, much like the tube watercolor, but also it can be diluted down. Because of the pigment load, it can be diluted down to this kind of clear transparency, like a watercolor effect. It does lift up a little bit if you go over it, just a tiny, tiny, tiny bit, not much. So just like with watercolor, if you put it down and you go over it, you might have a little disturbance of the colors underneath. Similar with gouache, but you kind of have to work hard at getting that undercolor mixed up into it. So you're fairly safe with that. The other beautiful thing about it, to say, one of the quality or characteristics that you can achieve with the gouache between the opacity, but you can also get these super, super great controlled lines. If you think of the opacity and the flatness of the paint, you can, take your rigger brush, your light, nice, long, thin, or, sign writing brush, another word for it, and get those beautiful lines, on top of a clear tray. If you wanted to do a wash in watercolor first, and then go over and get your line work and your brush work, overlay gouache to really create detail. That's just one. It's just such a flexible medium like that. Similarly, I would also say it has some great qualities that I would compare to oil. Personally, I have years of oil painting. That's where I came from. So how I would compare it to oil is you can work from back to front, much like I would paint, with an oil painting. I don't know, I learned a long time ago, my teacher, it's still in my head from when I was 8 years old, start up in the upper left, and then, come back, come down, and come forward. It still kind of tends to be how I work in oil, but, so it has that quality, where you can layer and move from back to front if that's your process and what you're comfortable with. It's the opposite in watercolor, right? You don't have to save your space or your white or use the vibrancy of that paper underneath to illuminate the watercolor, okay? Additionally, you can use some glazing techniques with gouache. I might do some tonight just to show you, but if you can, if you have a passage of your painting when you're giving yourself your own critique, you step away from your painting, we do these little things like we'll walk away and we'll turn around and we'll look at our painting and we'll go, whoa, I got to change that upper right corner. It's way too bright, right? Right away your eye goes to the area that needs some help. So that's when you can take your gouache and just lightly glaze over an area to unify the color or to unify or to calm something down, a passage down. Yeah, and then I would say acrylic. So gouache is I think, very similar to acrylic in that it's opaque, but it has all these other characteristics of oil and watercolor as well. It does dry fast, which is great because then you can go right back in and layer on top of it. There is actually acrylic gouache as well, so it's just, and I brought those tonight, and when you look at it and work with it, you really can't, I personally can't tell the difference between regular gouache and acrylic gouache when I'm working with them. The nice thing is when you use acrylic gouache, if you put it down, it is not moving. You could go right over that and you're not going to pick anything up from underneath because it does have a polymer in it, and a polymer binder, so it is, it's going to stay put. So those are the nice aspects of gouache paint. A lot of plein air, because we've kind of had this renaissance in plein air painting as well. Not that it ever went away, it was just kind of more subdued in the 60s and 70s, historically, into the 80s, and now, we have this kind of renewed interest in plein air painting across the country. And so gouache has kind of become a preferred vehicle for a lot of plein air painters as well, because of all these properties that I just spoke of. And it's also, if you like to paint in oil, you want to paint outside in oil, super, but the cleanup, some of those things can be deterrents for getting outside. The mediums and the cleanup and the brushes and whereas if you're using a water-based medium like watercolor or gouache, it's one less thing that gets in the way of getting yourself out the door and setting up to paint. Any questions?
You say you see no difference with the acrylic?
No, I don't. It dries a little faster. And the other thing I would say about the gouache, which I really love, as opposed to, say, like acrylic paint, there's very little shifting when you're working wet in it and when it dries. I don't see a big, do any of my other gouache painters, what do you think? Have you seen a big shift of color? Anybody else who's using gouache? I only asked that because I felt like that was one of the strengths, that it didn't shift. When it dried, it didn't, we've all had that experience. We get home and if you're painting outdoors and you go, oh my gosh, I thought it was blue. You get home and it's a completely different color blue than you would want it. But I find with the gouache, it really does stay true. When it's wet, when you paint it, and you get home and you still like that color. It's still the same. But I've read other people, I was listening to an interview and this other gouache artist was saying, how much it shifted. And I was thinking, I don't have that experience at all. But, okay. So I do have a few pictures of artists. There's a ton of gouache artists out there. I just picked 4 that are active now and have a big following, and you can find them easily they're on the papers that I gave you if you want to look into them a little bit more. James Garroni, you may be familiar with him. He has a fantastic newsletter, YouTube channel, blog. He's an illustrator. He's got decades of experience. Did a lot of fantasy illustration back in the 80s and 90s, but he also uses casein paint a lot. But he uses a lot of gouache. And Lina Rivo, she is I believe she's in Portugal, but she has another very active social media presence. If anybody's on Instagram or she's on YouTube and all that, and they all have classes on the YouTube channels too. You can go and watch. And I will also say Lina Rivo also has an ebook that's free. I actually wrote her a note and thanked her because it was so incredibly generous and so well written. She has 2 free ebooks that you can download. One's on gouache and one's on plein air painting. So she is a very generous ebooks, and they're free. Dina Brodsky, I believe, is in Boston. She's a young woman. If you're anybody on Instagram, you can follow her. She is fabulous. She does these fabulous reels, which are just like the mini videos of her painting. And she uses gouache, and she does this whole thing with her sketchbook practice. So does anybody have a sketchbook practice here? Okay, so that's a kind of one of the ways you can approach your art, you know, practicing and, you know, having your sketchbook with you and your, you know, creating your ideas and your references and all of that. So she does a whole practice with sketchbook work and using gouache, and she'll kind of do an underpainting first, or do a wash first in like an acrylic ink, and then paint on top of it. It's just vibrant. If you ever get a chance to see her work. And then Scott Christensen is another one, and they're all outdoor. They're all plein air painters as well. Scott Christensen is a well-known plein air painter from, I believe, Idaho or Iowa. Either one. And he has just beautiful work as well. I'm going to show you now. So that's Scott Christensen's. You know, I don't know if anybody's an abstract painter here. Is anybody an abstract painter? Okay, so I haven't seen any gouache abstract artists, but I'm sure they are out there. I just couldn't find one for an example. This is fairly traditional florals and landscape here. But the other piece of gouache, and another property that I absolutely love about it, is it really shows the brushwork. If you're a painter that loves to show brushwork, you know, gouache is a fabulous medium for you. You can really see which brushes he used, how he changed them up. Okay, this is James Gurney. That's just a quick illustration. He's a fabulous artist that probably doesn't really reflect his level of abilities. You know, he does all these landscape sketchbooks, just beautiful work. This is Dina Brodsky. So she has these little sketchbooks that she does, and she works tiny. So there's this whole other movement, right, of miniature painting. If you follow any of that, you know, the miniature paintings, which are just amazing. You know, that's probably, what, 4 by 5 maybe, if that. But she does these gorgeous studies of trees. Okay, that's another one. Yeah. She's also an oil painter. Lena Revo, she is been doing gouache for many years now. It looks like she's kind of getting into some pastel as well recently, but she's just, what I love about Lena's work is that she is really alla prima, right? So she's really in the moment. She's not working back to front. You know, she's really there alla prima, right in the moment, and really kind of capturing what's happening with her brushwork and her color. Oops, sorry, this one didn't. There we go. Okay. You just, you know, they're just lovely, right? These little studies, they just capture, they're deceptively simple. They're not, right? We know they're not, but they look. The colors are brilliant. She really uses gouache. She really showcases gouache, you know, the attributes and the qualities. Okay. But so these are some of mine. I just threw a few up. So those are gouache. This one's all gouache. That was like a 8 by 10. This one's kind of a mixed media watercolor and gouache. Again, watercolor and gouache play so well together. That's the aspect. So these are just some. And it's also like I use the fine black ink pen on this as well. Like, you know, they have those micro pens now, and like the old rapidograph, those like super fine permanent. You want permanent black ink. Don't get the water based. we all make that mistake once. But you know, it plays well with, you know, it plays well with the gouache. It plays well with the watercolor. If you want that look, right? It's a look. These again, super bright. So you can tell I love color. They're a little bit better on the screen here, as opposed to kind of.
Oh, the lights are on.
Like, yeah, it's a little yellowy. But these are small too. These were, I think that was like a 6 by 6, and that probably was maybe a 7 by 10, I think. Again, just gouache, easy peasy. Starting with a wash, going in with a heavier layer afterwards, more opacity. Okay. Yeah, so two quick things, especially if you've been painting for a while. Fugitive colors. In gouache, there tend to be not too many. They're pretty good. We don't, if you have your tubes of paint, I'm sure if you're oil painting, acrylic painting, watercolor, you look on your tube and you kind of look for the transparency rating, the, what's the term I'm using, looking for the one where it stays, what's the term? Where it's permanence, right. Permanence, thank you. So the permanence rating. So most of the gouache paints now, especially the high, they're pretty high quality now. That they're mostly pretty permanent. The only ones that are really problematic are like the neon colors, those super bright neons. Those tend to be very fugitive. I wouldn't use those in anything you're going to sell or, frame or whatever.
By fugitive, you mean the fade?
Yes, yeah. Yeah, and then just last thing, we talked a little bit about alla prima, or laying front to back, dry brushing for texture. You can just see how this is such a flexible paint. You could do so many different techniques with it. Wet on wet, just like watercolor. And I would, if I were doing a massive background, I would still wet the paper like I was, as if I were using watercolor. I would still use a big wide brush, load it up, and try to get that down because it does dry fast, and you do want to avoid those lines that can happen at times, right? The nice thing is if you do get a little bit of a line, you can go back in and re-wet it and kind of work it a little bit. The regular gouache, not the acrylic gouache. Does this make sense? Everything sounds okay. All right, so that's the end of that, which is good, because it's right about. So if we want to take a break and get your coffee, your drinks, or not coffee, drinks, whatever treats, we'll take a minute. I'm going to set up a palette, and then I'm going to paint, do a quick demo. I always work small, or I tend to work small with gouache, again, because I'm an outdoor painter. I guess we could spend 1 minute real quick here going over supplies. Okay. So I did bring a couple of different types of gouache paints. I have my, as I said, the Caran d'Ache, which is kind of the fun one. Not too expensive. I brought my, what I use almost all the time, which is the Holbein. You may be familiar with Holbein paints. They make all sorts of different paints. They're great, wonderful quality. The other one, these, I haven't used them yet, but I just got them. This is the Schminke paints. They also make all sorts of different paints, oils, acrylics. They're very high. These are probably, I think, these are very high quality. They're very expensive, so that's why I have these little tiny tubes, because I didn't go any bigger. But they pack a punch, and they come highly recommended as well. And then I have, you can use, just like watercolors, you can use a china plate, you can use a regular palette, a plastic palette works fine. You can use a paper plate if you want. Yeah, absolutely, just like watercolor. If you're painting outdoors and you don't want to be bothered putting tubes out, you can do something like this, where you can order this off of Amazon. You can fill up your little squares here with your gouache paint. And this has a seal on it, so it stays pretty, if you keep spritzing it with water, it'll stay wet for quite a while, at least the season. You'll get through a season. But this is pretty dry now because I haven't used these in a while, but it's just another way to do it.
You can bring it back?
Yep. So this will, and again, this is the regular gouache. Do not do this with the acrylic gouache, because if you fill this up with acrylic gouache, it will dry and be permanent, and that'll be that. You will use just like acrylic paint. And then paper again. We talked a little bit about paper. It's great to have a sketchbook if you haven't used one. It is nice if you want to put together a little packet to keep in your car, your glove box. a little sketchbook with heavy duty, they come with all sorts of wonderful watercolor papers now, they can handle anything. These are really nice as well. These are art boards, it's like illustration board is wonderful with gouache as well. And it also gives you that nice, solid, heavy surface if you're working outdoors, little support. Also, the regular Arches block watercolor paper is always great too. Yeah, so brushes, the only thing I would say about brushes, I hate to tell people what kind of brushes to use. Because I kind of feel like it's one of those things, you just gotta feel it out. The only thing I would say is don't use like hog bristle oil brushes with gouache. It's too stiff, right? And you don't want to use your softest watercolor brushes with gouache either, because it has a little body, so it needs a little more stiffness. Acrylic brushes are usually pretty good, and mixed media are pretty good. Your stiffer watercolor brushes, you may want one nice watercolor brush, wide one to get your washes in first. But typically I would stay away from those stiffer, harder brushes because they're going to be too hard for the softness of the paint, if that makes sense. And like watercolor, where you're concerned with charging your brush and filling it up with water, and how much is it going to hold, you end up, kind of feeling your way through that with gouache as well. I think that's just about it. Yeah, I think I'll put my palette out. Does everybody have their own palette that they have developed over the years? Like they kind of, you have colors that you automatically put out when you're working? You tend to use the same colors? Yeah. So I use what I call a split palette, which is just the warm and cool of the primaries. So like a lemon yellow and a cadmium yellow, a alizarin crimson and a cadmium red. Cerulean blue and an ultramarine blue. And then depending on, again, as an outdoor painter, depending on the season, depending on geography, I might add and subtract from some of those, add some extra greens in certain times of year, extra, maybe a purple, maybe a teal, maybe, some other extra earth colors depending on the time of year and geography. Does it make sense? Mm-hmm. So that's kind of what my palette is. So tonight I'm going to use a split primary, warm and cool, and I'll probably throw a few extras in there just for fun, because it's the fall, and we have these brilliant colors that we love. That's the image I'm using tonight. Yeah, so that's great. Why don't we take a quick break?
Okay, well, before you take the quick break, I forgot to do some business. We have scholarship. We usually have given a scholarship to a high school student that has majored, is going to go to school and major in art, and we need to vote on that. We normally, in past years, we give a $500, we give a gift card to Michael so they can buy supplies, and we need to, we talked to our treasurer, and we have enough money to do $500. So we want to know if you guys want to discuss it, if you think that we should not give it or should give it. And if you do, then we can vote on it, because Tim is our person that's liaison with the schools for the scholarship, and they need to know that fairly soon if we're going to be doing this, because we have to get the students to apply, and then we have to have, Tim will get a group of artists and decide which ones, that would be given the scholarship. So, yes. Can they just give them $500 and they can use it wherever they want? Why restrict it?
It's
If they're away at school and everything.
It's currently a gift card to Michael's so that it's used for art rather than giving them a $500 visa to go to whatever. The idea is to make it stay toward the schooling. If we give them $500 toward a scholarship, then that can mess up their other scholarships and their funding. So this, keeping it to strictly Michael's, keeps it more usable for them and very, very helpful from the ones that I've talked with in the past. They've been very appreciative of having that extra $500 for just supplies.
Any other comments? Do we just give one out?
Yes, a number of years ago, we had a couple of them that were excellent, and we split it. But normally we just give one out.
I think we have the money, do it.
Anybody else have, you want to take a vote? This a motion to give a scholarship for $500?
So moved.
I motion.
Seconded? And everyone that's a member, only members can vote, and I think we have almost all members here. Raise your hand if you agree. Okay, and it's passed, and Tim can
We can't
do
shoot
that. Now, we have water and we have cookies in the back, so we're going to take a little break while Anne Marie sets up for her demo. So if you guys want to do that?
Yes. Okay, you said to bring supplies too. Are we gonna paint along with Anne Marie?
You
Or
can.
afterwards, or, okay, that's,
I
okay.
think you're going to be painting along with you or painting after you?
Yeah, I was gonna, you're welcome, if you have something that you brought, like an image that you want to work off of, you are welcome to paint right along or do whatever, and you're welcome to help yourself to any of these paints up here and just play with it. Unless afterwards, if you want to just watch and listen, you know, and then afterwards you want to play around with it a little bit, you're welcome to do that as well. Okay. I'm going to work small, so it probably, I'm hoping I'll be done in an hour. So there'll be time if people want to fool around with it a little bit. You're welcome to do so.
Okay, so you guys want to get up and fix up and we do have,
It may not be trying to recreate something, it may just be being expressive and mark making and whatever. There's a whole spectrum of ideals around painting. But if we're working off of a traditional landscape, which is what I'm doing, let me get my image up here. And I just used a photograph, I'm just using a photograph from, excuse me for one sec. Just using a photograph from my plein air painting group. I'm just doing a very traditional New England fall landscape, birch trees, maples. This is in the you know, luckily we are surrounded by such a beautiful conservation land here. You can't go wrong. You know, there's just beautiful things everywhere. So I'm going to work off of this. Unfortunately, I don't have a way. If I were super tech savvy, I could probably figure it out. But I wish there was a way I could have the image up here for you to see it. So unfortunately, I can't. But we'll just do the best we can. So one thing I did want to show you before we start. So looking at this, actually, you know what? Looking at this image. Can you see this well enough? If I hold it up, is it too small? Can you see it well enough? Okay, okay. So I do apologize if I were a little bit more. So looking at an image, the first thing I want to do, and I'm looking at all my images, I'm like, what's going to work? What do we respond to? We respond, I think the most important thing to look at first is, picking an image that you respond to, that you love, and then really kind of taking a moment to say, all right, what's my focal point? What is this about? And then, just like a writing process, we end up needing to be, as artists, editors, and editing out that which does not support our main idea. This is just, of course, one way to approach painting. There's a multitude of ways. We could be here for months talking about ways to approach painting. I'm doing a very traditional landscape approach, using very traditional composition and value, focal point, those types of elements of art type of approach. This is just one of many ways. So, the first thing I want to do is say, okay, before I start, let me look at, see, is my eye reading this image well? Because we know, as painters, that we tend to read an image from left to right. So, is this new to you, or you've heard this before? Okay. So we tend to read an image from left to right. We enter into a picture plane, and our goal as artists is to grasp the viewer and have them stay on this picture plane as long as possible. We don't want to skitter right through and go out the other side. So we need to think about this image and how it works for us to do just that. And what works well here is that we have this nice entryway through this green pathway. We have this gray tree going up the side here, which really does kind of provide a visual stopping point for the eye. And it's going to swing back around with this cascade of color of leaves. So it's kind of a nicely set up composition just naturally. And if you want to learn more about composition, or if it's something that you want to dig into a little bit more, you could get into, some very traditional compositional studies like Payne's compositions and things like that. And it really gets into, these ideas of how paintings can be structured, kind of the bones of the painting, and how it helps us stay in the painting longer, why it makes us happy, as people in our vision. We have certain proclivities visually. So this is just, just starting out. The next thing I would do is I would go ahead and do thumbnails. Does anybody do thumbnails before they paint, before they commit? Okay, so thumbnails, so the beauty of thumbnails is, I'm going to assume that you're going to spend some time on your painting, whether it be oil, acrylic, wash, whatever. You're going to put time in. So take 10 minutes, because that's really all it takes, and give yourself 4 little thumbnails, especially if you're newer to painting or newer to art and you're kind of trying to figure all this out. It's a great way to kind of give yourself some opportunities. So I would take this image, I would put it in a square format. I would take this image, I would put it in a panoramic, which is just 2 times 3, right? I would do a vertical, I would do a horizontal, and I would just kind of play around with it. How is everybody on, as far as editing photos on their computers? So, okay. So you can do it with pencil and paper, and just do little sketches, and just do that, or you can go, if you are happy and comfortable using the editing software in your photo, right on the Mac or the photo of Photoshop. You don't even need to go into Photoshop. It's right there with your, right with your pictures on your laptop. And just go in and you can go ahead right away and kind of play around with some different types of formats before you commit, because you could surprise yourself and probably get 3 paintings out of the same image if you really love that image, or the colors. And also it just makes for a stronger composition. You'll just take the time to kind of do that. So, for example, the other thing, which is a great one to do, again, this whole idea of the eye coming in and moving around, just if you're, again, familiar and comfortable working in your laptop with your photos, they have this little element called flip, and it flips the image. Just flip it. See what happens. It's amazing how just flipping an image can radically transform a composition and make it much stronger. So, I'm going to go here. So, for example, here's my square. Here's my square format. Not loving it because it cuts too much of that yellow tree off. Okay. Here's my pano. And panos can be horizontal or vertical, panoramic. That would be kind of a nice one to go back and do, the pano. I'm not doing the pano tonight, but it would be a nice, you could see where it would really work well with the strong vertical lines that already exist in that image. You could see a series of these, couldn't you? Just several panos in a row. And then the horizontal and the vertical, I won't even bother with the horizontal. We're just going to go right to the vertical. Now I'm looking at this image, I'm going, okay, I want the vertical. It works well with the lines of the trees. I'm going to a standard size, because what happens when we don't use a standard size? we pay, right? We pay through the nose, whether it be framing or whatever, I mean, sometimes we just like, you want to, like, I had to try the circle, I had to try it. Have you ever tried to frame a circle painting? It's not fun and it's expensive. So, I always take a moment and kind of, scale it up to, and you have to, pay attention to your ratios, scale it to those traditional sizes. Just, if you're not 100% familiar with that, take a waltz through Michaels down to the framing section and see what they have on the walls. They've got 5x7s, they've got 8x10s, not too many 9x12s.
No.
Don't get seduced by a 9x12. 16x20s, right? 12x18s, those are all fairly standard sizes. Because it just saves you money in the long run, and it makes it easier to frame it. You can just get something off the rack. So anyways, so this is a 5x7. I tend to work small because I work outside a lot, and I have short chunks of time because of the stage of life I'm in. So that's what we're doing. The only thing I'm going to do here, and this is the image, I cropped it, and I got rid of this sky when you see my image, because it's the huge value shift, isn't it? If I stuck that sky in, we're taking a big, that's too distracting for me. This is my opinion. You may not agree, and that's totally fine. You might want to leave your sky in. But for me, I think I like my composition better without the sky. I feel it's stronger. There isn't quite as much as a big value shift that's going to take my eye up and out of the painting, okay? Yeah, I'm sorry, I apologize. This is not too. And now I'm saying, okay, great. And then the next thing I want to look at before I start painting is my values. Has everybody done some work in values? Okay, grayscale. So we're going to squint a little bit at this. We're going to take a look and say, all right, where's my darkest dark? Where's my lightest light? Where's my gray or my mid-tone? So what we'd look here, we'd squint at it, and we'd say, okay, good. I've got about, I'd say, probably 50% of this is lighter tones, right? Probably 1s, 2s, and 3s. And I would say probably 20% at the most is the darkest darks, okay? And then that leaves me with 30% of those midtones, which is what I want. Visually, again, if you have value structure, if we're thinking of the grayscale, if you end up breaking up your painting 30%, 30%, 30%, it doesn't work. It doesn't work as well typically in a traditional painting setup. It's the eye isn't caught. We're looking more for the greater the contrast and the variation. It is able to, and again, this is one way of teaching. It's the contrast is what drives the interest, okay? Contrast is like the word of the night. Contrast in color, contrast in texture, contrast in mark making, contrast in value. All of these things drive interest and grab our eye and attention. So we can use that tool in our paintings. Focal point is going to have all these rules, they're like kind of in quotes. Usually our focal points, our main points, that's where our highest contrast is going to occur, whether it be contrast in value, where it's going to be the most mark making, texture, edges, that's where this is. Color, maybe you create contrast and interest by using complementary colors, or red against a green, which is totally going to work well in this situation, right? I'm going to play that up. That's just a natural. All those things, those contrasts, is what really grabs our eye and attention. So the only other piece that I'm going to look at before I start painting is edges. Has anybody worked with edges before? Paying attention to edges? 3 types of edges, roughly? Is this new? A little new? Okay. Or not, yeah. So hard, soft, and lost and found. So if you went to the Sargent exhibit at the MFA, he was a master of edges, and especially a master of the lost and found edge. So hard edge is where you're going to have your, like if I look at this image, my focal point's here, right? So my hardest edges are going to be in here. In fact, this gray rock that, anybody right, you could use it on your image too, if you were working indoors, this would totally help you. But if you're outdoors, it's super helpful. The other thing you can do is take your image, you got a nice photograph you're working off of, print it out in grayscale. You can when you print out your photo, print it out in grayscale, and then, or black and white, but it'll give you the full grayscale, so that helps you see your values. It's only going to help you make it stronger, make a stronger painting. I'm going to pass this around, and just to see it. Paint, okay. I'll just pass it and let everyone see it if they want it. And then I put on the paper, there's also some apps on your phone if you're feeling tech savvy. At the bottom of the paper, there's also some apps you could use to help you with values and gridding and all of that kind of stuff. I'll let you explore that one on your own. All right, so I'm going to get busy here. Okay, so I'm going big to small. Start with my biggest, widest brushes. I'm going to work in some basic shapes, like flat puzzle pieces. I'm not going to worry about creating mass or volume right now. We're just going to get some washes in. I want to get rid of that white. Paper. I'm not going to, this is pretty watery for gouache. I already penciled in some of this. I'm just going to make some more marks here. I can make sure I can see what I'm doing. And the nice thing about working in nature is you can just make it up as you go along, right? You don't have to. I'm just looking at my big shapes. Big shapes.
Do you have concern about whether you go dark to light or light to dark? Is that not?
No, that's the beauty of gouache. Yeah, you can fool around with it either way. So I'm just going to go get some. And I'm using a pretty straightforward watery concoction here. From a color perspective, what is most concerning is there isn't a big value shift between the green and the yellow, so I'm going to have to change that a little bit, in my opinion, because it's going to be too much the same, too much same. The other thing is we have an explosion of color going on here. And as much and as tempting as it is to just go to town with all that color, which is something I tend to do and I try to back off of it, is you need places for your eye to rest, right? So as much as we want to just go crazy with this color, we want to think about grays. Think about how we're going to tone that yellow down. This is my first pass, so I don't want anything too crazy bright. A yellow ochre color. And I'm going to be kind of loose and fast tonight. I'm not going to get too stressed. Again, I know I can go, because gouache is so opaque, I know I can go back over this if I'm not happy or if I need to change things. So I'm changing the tree line just a smidge because I don't want it cut off at the top. I want to make sure my tree falls within my picture frame, just a personal preference. I've got some nice lighter colors down here. Okay. Reds. Go very easy on the reds type of paint. I'm gonna start slow with those babies. They tend to dominate, right? Reds just totally take over. Just like the phalos. I didn't even put any phalo or anything out here because they just take over. I'm just gonna use that little piece of just a little pinkish reddish here because we've got this kind of gorgeous little transition. I want to remind myself I've got some reds and pinks up here, so sometimes I just put a reminder in. It's not that it has to be developed, I don't want to forget that, because it's got this gorgeous little transition, right, between this, I don't know what to call it, pale salmon all the way into yellow. You know, it's just, it's almost like a ombre transition. Get these beautiful pinks. And again, I'm starting with my big fat brush. I'm not worrying too much. Now, some browns, kind of calm this down a little bit. Greeny browns. Get down here a little. Remember I said I was going to just kind of bring that angle in just a smidge. Get a little bit back here. Now for the water, I'm going to start with my darkest darks because reflections are really interesting. Has anyone worked with reflections in water before? They're tricky, right? They're not easy. So what I tend to do is I tend to start with my darkest darks first. And think of it in layers. You know, think of it as puzzle pieces. Dark puzzle pieces first. And then you're going to layer your lighter on top. And again, soft edges. So that's really important. So we usually don't use a lot of black, very little, but in this case I will add a little bit. And again, just like oil painting, you can get some beautiful blacks without actually using black, right? You can mix purpley, blue. If I add purple in here, it's going to almost introduce too many colors, right? Tone that back down. Those colors harmonize better, right? If I went with that purple, it would have been like, ooh, too much. You can always go back over this. I've got some gorgeous darks in here. This is my first pass. I just really want to get rid of the white paper. I'm going to go back and we've got some beautiful green reflections in there. Wipe that off. Oh, yeah, that's good. And I'm still using gouache here really as a watercolor, more of a watercolor than a gouache, just to get some of this in. mark in my trees, just to give myself some guiding lines. So.
I'm going to start with my darkest darks here first.
I've got some darks right here. I've got some darks right down here at the water's edge. And I've got some back in here. Softness in the line. Okay, it's looking really messy. But this is the beauty of gouache, I think, is that we can then go back in now and start pulling out some harder lines. And when you're working with trees, it's great to have several different types of brushes that help you distinguish either distance and leave, like we'll leave some of these big fat brush strokes in the background, like with a bright or a flat. And then as we move closer, I'm switching my brush to a round. This is just, you could reverse that if you wanted to. I'm just saying, using these tools to our advantage to distinguish depth and branch and interest. So I might go back in, I probably will go back in with some more flats in here at some point. But right now I'm interested in getting in some of these branches for the trees. So I'm really gonna look here. I'm going to start with a darker color first rather than going right to the white, because that's going to give me depth when I go back over it with my bright white. And this is where gouache can really work to your advantage. Back in there. It's going to disappear behind that. And also, the more, just in general, painting trees.
Does it help to have the reference color on your thumb?
Yeah, that's right. I am the messiest painter ever. It's usually on me, on my face, on my clothes. Yeah. I want to see some of these babies kind of disappear up in here because we're thinking depth. We've got these beautiful lines that can come in on top of that black now because we laid that black down first, those darkest layers. Maybe get some nice. I'm not going to get too thick yet, just because I want to see how this is going. Okay. Okay, so now I know, I'm starting to see some shape here, which is good. We can probably put in a little bit of this. Remember what I said about changing up this, the rock? I may or may not, depends on what it calls for, right? I'm going to warm up that pathway area just a smidge too. Use a little dry brush technique in there, get a little texture.
we also talked about creating that angle with the branches. We could just come right back in here and do a nice little branch that's going to disappear into the water. And help us. Might be a distraction. We might not even, might not look, may not look right at all, so we might get rid of it. I don't know. So now we're going to go back to the background again. This is all drying up front. And I'm going to go back to the background, and I'm going to think, all right, I need to create some interest in the background, but I want to cool those greens down because they're a little too warm for receding, and I also want to think a little bit about the gray rust area. We're just going to make it up a little bit, which I'm totally fine with. And I love this brush. This is like a flat. So useful, especially with branches and trees. All right, so I'm going to pull in. This is where I tend to pull in my turquoise, which I'm sure other people would never do, but I love it. It gives it that cooler, and a little white, it gives it that kind of grayed out color that I want. Let's also give us a nice little rest area. I'm just going to soften these edges. This will be nice and receding when we get back to these bright yellows and reds up front. I just want to create some texture. Leave that alone for right now. I like the way it's darkened up. The other thing I want to do is this funny pinky color and reds. If you look, if you can see, I'm sorry, you can't see the picture that I'm looking at, but the leaves have this tiny little bit of red in it too. And it's kind of nice to, if you have a bright color in one area of the painting, if you can sprinkle it in somewhere else, it just helps the eye connect. And even though they're super dark in the photo, I'm going to kind of calm them down a little bit. Because if there's too much contrast back there, my eye's going to go there instead of those bright colors. It's going to compete a little too much. I can always add more dark if I want to later. But for right now, just more of a marker. Some of this will make more sense once we get into our final layers with our leaves. We're going to want to put them over that and break those up.
think I have most of my darkest darks and I have most of my midtones in, and now I'm gonna go in with my brights just to kind of create a little more volume and body before I can kind of finish up the painting. And this is when I'm gonna not water the gouache down a whole lot. We're gonna use that thickness and that opacity to our advantage. But you can see how you could do your first pass with watercolor. So I'm gonna go with my midtones. Not my brightest, lightest colors just yet. I'm gonna build it up a little bit so we've got some body, and I'm really just using the side of the brush. Again, just trying to create some more interest with brushwork. Just by turning it on its side. I really want to create this kind of like paying attention to, you know, how do these trees actually work? Latest ones are going to be on top, right, because that's our sun. Sunlight's getting to those. Get a little money in here, so I'm going to have to go back in and define that a little bit more.
That pinky color, what did you mix to get that?
Just a little bit of scarlet, a little bit of the cad yellow, and the white. If you don't want it to be like super bright, you can just throw a little raw umber in there and it'll kind of tone it right down.
Now, you have no problem going over those colors.
Not at all, yeah,
Right.
thank you.
None of them are bleeding into each other.
Nope, once they're down, they're pretty good. I mean, they do say that you can pick up some of the undercolor, but you'd have to work pretty hard at it. messy in here, so I feel like I need to go back in and just, and then tighten that up a little bit. I have to decide if I want to go dark or light, the value. The value has to shift in there because it's getting messy. You see that? Where this is too close in value? And I need to kind of break that up a little bit. So it should go. Just do a little bit on that reflection, and we're going to call it a night. I don't keep it too long. Without making it look too samey, I'm going to go back in here with some very, very pale blue to split the specs too. So I'm going to stop because it's 9. Does that sound good?
Yes.
Good. Probably like saturated.
It looks great.
It's getting there. It needs some more work.
I like it loose.
It's loose. I got to do a little bit more down in here and a little bit more in here. And this red needs a little help. I gotta go back in and do the red. So that's that. I hope it's helpful.
Thank you.
My last little plug here you're welcome to join our Central Mass Plein Air Painters group. We meet on Mondays, May 1st through November 1st outside. It's on the Facebook page, so I have listed. It's all levels. That's right. I mean, it's a friendly group. There's beginners. There's people who've been painting their whole life. There's no instruction, but if you want help, there's plenty of people there who are more than happy to help you. Look, like our buddy Ralph, who's always helpful, and Sid, and Pam's been coming. So it's a wonderful group. And then from November 1st to May 1st, we go indoors, and that's at 19 Carter in Berlin, which is a community group. I don't know if you know what that's an old rehabbed church in the center of Berlin. It's fantastic. If you check out their website, because they just have a ton of stuff going on all the time over there, so there's something else that catches your eye. But we run it on Friday mornings from 9 to 12. It's an open studio, so it's pretty much anything goes. Like sometimes I'll show up with stitching instead of painting. So.
What time on Mondays?
Mondays we typically we're loosey goose. We start at 8:30. Usually Ralph and I are there first thing at 8:30, and then people show up anywhere between 8:30 and 10. And then we tend to wrap up around noon.
What was the address?
So the outside or the inside?
The inside.
The inside is 19 Carter, and it's right on the handout that I gave you too. Yeah, the website, and it's in the center of Berlin. So it's 19 Carter Street is actually the address too. So, yep, it's a nice place. There's coffee and treats. Yeah, Friday mornings. Bring your friend. Yeah, and then we have one artist who's actually, 2 artists who are actually organizing outdoor painting in the winter on the weekends, and I think she's going to continue the weekends through the spring and summer too. So she'll do it on a Saturday or a Sunday. So it's all posted on the Facebook page. You just got to keep going back to the page and check it out. So hope that's
There's
helpful.
no signing up, you just,
No signing up,
no
no.
signing up, just go on
Yeah.
the Facebook page and it'll tell you who's doing what.
Yep.
And what time, and very, very good.
Yes, it's very good. It's very loose. That's why it's still around.